Between 1943 and 1946, over 400,000 German were held in camps across the United States. Many were sent to work on local farms under humane conditions unimaginable to them. Treated with respect, given fair food, and even allowed to play music, countless POWs later wrote letters describing how their time in America changed their view of the enemy and of democracy itself. August 12, 1944, somewhere over Normandy, France, the sky is alive with fire. Tracer rounds streak upward, slashing through the night like red comets. Inside the belly of a B-17 flying fortress, 19-year-old Sergeant Karl Heinemann grips the side of his seat. Sweat pools under his flight cap, even in the cold air that seeps through the fuselage. His Luftwaffe squadron has been torn apart by Allied P-51s, and the last radio transmission he heard was a scream cut short by static. The engine coughs. A sudden jolt throws Karl against the instrument panel. "Feuer! Feuer!" someone shouts. Flames crawl along the wing. He unbuckles, kicks open the hatch, and the night swallows him whole. For a moment, just wind, silence, and the dizzying spin of stars. Then his parachute jerks open, and the world explodes in flashes below. When he lands, it's not on German soil. American boots surround him before he can even reach for his pistol. "Easy, Kraut," says a young GI, his rifle steady but his voice oddly calm. Karl raises his hands. He doesn't know yet that this night will carry him thousands of miles across the ocean, to a world that will upend everything he believes about enemies, war, and humanity itself. 2 months later, he's shackled with dozens of other POWs aboard the Liberty ship SS Thomas H. Barry, bound for the United States. The Atlantic is calm, the smell of diesel thick in the air. None of them speak above a whisper. "They'll shoot us, yeah?" one mutters. Karl doesn't answer. The only America he knows is the one from propaganda films. Brutal, mechanical, godless. He closes his eyes, expecting the worst. But when the ship docks at Hampton Roads, Virginia, there are no jeering crowds, no rifles raised. Just quiet efficiency. The Americans line them up, feed them warm stew, and hand them cigarettes. A corporal smiles and says, "Welcome to the States, fellas. You're gonna be here a while." Karl can't make sense of it. The guards joke, share food, even help him with English words. When he's loaded onto a train heading west, he stares through the window at endless fields rolling past in the summer heat. The war feels impossibly far away, and yet it follows him still, in every heartbeat. Somewhere, deep inside, something begins to shift. October 3rd, 1944. Camp Concordia, Kansas. Dust devils rise in the late afternoon wind, spinning through the rows of wooden barracks. Sergeant Karl Heinemann wipes sweat from his brow as the guards count heads again. Around him, hundreds of German POWs, once tank gunners, radio operators, and infantrymen, stand in silence. The camp is enormous, a small city surrounded by barbed wire, but it feels strangely quiet. At first, Karl had braced for cruelty. He expected interrogations, forced labor, maybe even starvation. Instead, he was issued a clean uniform marked PW and given 3 full meals a day. The food, white bread, coffee, even butter, was richer than what his family had back in Bremen. At night, the men were allowed to write letters home. "They feed us well," he wrote to his mother. "Too well, almost. I feel guilty eating this much." The guards seemed young, friendly, sometimes even bored. One of them, Corporal Jim Haskins from Nebraska, talked to the prisoners through the fence. "You boys are lucky you're not in the Pacific," he'd joke. "Here, the worst thing you'll fight is a Kansas winter." He taught Carl baseball, how to hold a bat, how to read a curveball, and laughed when Carl missed every pitch. "You'll get there, Kraut," Haskins said with a grin. As winter set in, Carl was moved to a smaller work detachment north of Salina. There were only 20 men, guarded by a handful of soldiers, sent to work on American farms. They were marched each morning past the frost-covered fields, the sound of boots crunching over the dirt roads. Farmers waited by their barns, hands rough and faces lined, but their eyes were not hateful. One morning, an older farmer named Walter Green approached Carl and handed him a steaming tin cup. "Coffee," he said simply. Carl hesitated, unsure if it was a trick. Green nodded. "Go on, son. You'll need it." That night, Carl sat in the barn loft beside the other prisoners, sipping the last of the coffee, staring at the stars through the slats in the wood. He didn't understand these Americans, how they could show such decency to the men who had bombed their allies, who had fought under Hitler's flag. For the first time since capture, Carl felt something new, a confusion that felt almost like hope. November 19th, 1944, near Salina, Kansas. A thin veil of frost covers the cornfields as the dawn breaks over the plains. The air smells of hay, diesel, and the faint sweetness of last season's harvest. Sergeant Carl Heinemann shoulders a burlap sack of feed, his breath rising in small white clouds. Around him, the other POWs work silently, their gray uniforms marked PW in bold black letters across the back. A jeep idles nearby, its engine sputtering in the cold. While Corporal Haskins reads from a clipboard, counting heads between sips of steaming coffee. The work is hard but honest. Mending fences, loading grain, repairing tractors. Each man earns 50 cents a day, though they never touch the money. It goes into camp accounts, spent on cigarettes, postcards, or records for the phonograph in the mess hall. Carl doesn't mind. For the first time in years, his labor isn't for killing, but for growing. Walter Green, the farmer, watches from the porch, a cigarette tucked between his lips. His wife, Mary, brings out a tray of sandwiches for the guards. Without hesitation, she adds 2 more plates, for the Germans. The men freeze, unsure whether to accept. Haskins shrugs. "Go on, boys. You worked for it." Mary smiles softly as Carl takes a sandwich. "You remind me of my son," she says. "He's in France." Carl nods, unable to speak. He feels the weight of the irony, her kindness feeding the man who might have aimed a rifle at her son months before. That night, after the day's work, Carl helps mend a barn roof. The sky burns orange as the sun sets behind the wheat fields. He hums an old folk song, Lily Marlene. To his surprise, Haskins hums along. They both laugh, a sound so human and unguarded that it echoes through the quiet farmyard. Later, back in the barracks, Carl writes in his small journal, "The Americans are strange people. They fight fiercely, but they do not hate us. Perhaps this is strength, not weakness." He doesn't yet realize it, but the world he left behind, the one of blind obedience and fear, is slowly unraveling, thread by thread. December 24th, 1944. The Green Farm, Kansas. Snow falls in heavy silence, blanketing the fields in white. The farmhouse windows glow faintly in the darkness, the warm light flickering like a beacon across the frozen plains. Inside the barn, the German prisoners huddle around a small iron stove, the smell of burning wood mixing with straw and wool. Someone strums a guitar, a handmade thing with uneven strings, and softly begins to sing Stille Nacht. Carl joins in, his voice trembling. For a few moments, the war, the wire, the miles between them and home, all of it fades. When the song ends, no one speaks. Then the barn door creaks open and cold air rushes in. Walter Green steps inside, holding a small crate. "Merry Christmas, boys," he says simply. Inside the box are oranges, apples, and a bottle of whiskey. The prisoners exchange glances. They don't know how to react. In Germany, Allied bombs are falling over cities tonight. Carl imagines his mother in the cellar, listening to the sirens. And here he is, being offered fruit by the enemy. "Mr. Green," Carl says quietly, "why are you doing this?" The old farmer looks at him, his eyes tired but kind. "Because it's Christmas," he answers, "and because my wife wouldn't let me sleep in the house if I didn't." He chuckles, handing out the fruit. Wars between governments, son, not between people. Later, in the barracks, Carl passes the whiskey bottle around. The men drink sparingly, careful to make it last. They toast to peace, to home, to surviving one more winter. Through the walls, the wind moans like a ghost. But above it all, faintly, the sound of a harmonica drifts through the night. An American tune this time, Silent Night in English. Carl closes his eyes. He feels something stir inside him, a painful, beautiful recognition that maybe the world isn't divided into good and evil as the Führer had claimed. Maybe it's just people, ordinary people trying to survive. Outside, the stars are sharp and cold. Across an ocean, men die in the Ardennes. But here, on a quiet Kansas farm, enemies share a Christmas fire. March the 2nd, 1945, Camp Algona, Iowa. The snow has begun to melt, leaving behind a thin crust of mud that clings to boots and wagon wheels alike. The war in Europe is reaching its final, brutal chapter. But here in the American heartland, the prisoners of war live a quieter existence. Sergeant Carl Heinemann now works at a sawmill run by a man named Harold Klein, a wiry farmer with a quick laugh and calloused hands. Each morning, the POWs march out under the guard of 2 soldiers, rifles slung lazily over their shoulders. By now, the routine is almost casual. Some days, the guards don't even load their weapons. The men ride in the back of trucks, singing German folk songs, their voices rising above the engine's rumble. It no longer feels like captivity. It feels like limbo, somewhere between punishment and peace. One afternoon, as Carl stacks lumber, Harold walks over, wiping sweat from his brow. "You ever think what you'll do after this is all over?" he asks. Carl pauses, unsure how to answer. "Go home, I suppose," he says. "If there's still a home." Harold nods slowly. "We'll all be trying to find one again." In the evenings, Carl and the others are allowed to gather in the recreation hut. They've built their own instruments from scrap wood and wire, violins, guitars, even a crude accordion. On Fridays, the guards come in to listen. Music fills the camp, drifting over the fences, echoing across the fields. Letters from home arrive irregularly, smudged with censor's ink. Carl reads by candlelight. "Your sister says the city is in ruins. Your father's factory is gone." He folds the paper carefully, heart aching. But even through the grief, he feels something he cannot name: gratitude. For the Americans who treat them not as monsters, but as men. One night, as thunder rolls across the plains, Carl writes again in his journal that they teach us more than they know, not with words, but with how they live. They work hard, they respect one another, and even their poorest are not afraid. He closes the notebook and stares into the storm. Somewhere beyond that horizon, Germany is dying. But here, in Iowa, a seed of something new is quietly taking root inside him. April 29, 1945. The Green Farm, Kansas. The news spreads across the camp like wildfire. Hitler is dead. Carl hears it from a guard first, a young man from Kentucky who bursts into the mess hall waving a newspaper. "Berlin's falling," he shouts, "and the Führer's gone." The words hang in the air like thunder. Some prisoners cheer, some curse, others stare into nothing. For Carl, it's as if the ground itself shifts beneath him. That evening, as he helps Walter Green repair a fence line, the farmer glances up at the fading sun and says quietly, "Guess that means you boys will be going home soon." Carl hesitates. Home. The word feels strange, hollow. "If there's anything left to go home to," he replies. Walter nods. "Reckon that's true." He pats Carl on the shoulder. But at least the dying's over. In the following days, the atmosphere in the camp changes. The guards are relaxed, almost friendly. The barbed wire still glints in the sun, but it no longer feels like a threat, more a formality. Some POWs volunteer to work extra hours on nearby farms. Others carve small wooden gifts for the Americans: birds, ships, crucifixes. Carl spends his evenings sketching, filling pages with drawings of barns, tractors, and faces he's grown to trust. One Sunday, Mary Green invites the work crew to attend church service in town. At first, the men are hesitant. Walking through the streets in their PW uniforms, they expect insults, maybe stones. But the townsfolk simply stare, whisper, and then, slowly, nod polite greetings. Inside the church, they sit in the back pews. The pastor's sermon is simple: "Love thy enemy." Carl doesn't understand every word, but the message feels familiar, like something he once believed in before the war twisted it. Afterward, as they walk back through the golden fields, a small boy runs up beside Carl and offers him a piece of candy. "Mama says you helped fix our fence," the boy says. Carl takes the candy, unsure whether to smile or cry. That night, under the soft hum of crickets, he writes again, "They have shown me a kind of strength our leaders never understood. Mercy, fairness, the quiet power of decency. The war is ending, but Carl knows. Something inside him has already changed forever." June 18, 1945, Fort Robinson, Nebraska. The war is officially over. Germany has surrendered. Across the plains, the American camps begin to empty. Thousands of men boarding trains bound for the East Coast, for ships that will take them home to a country in ruins. But not all are ready to leave. Some, like Carl, find themselves strangely torn. He stands by the camp fence that morning, watching the sunrise spread gold across the prairie. The smell of fresh-cut hay drifts from a nearby field, and for a fleeting moment, it feels like peace. Around him, prisoners chatter excitedly about their return, about family, rebuilding, maybe even forgiveness. Carl listens, but says nothing. When the trucks arrive to transfer his work detail back to Fort Robinson, the Green family comes to say goodbye. Walter shakes his hand firmly, his grip strong and unspoken. "You did good work, son," he says. "A man's worth ain't decided by the uniform he wears." Mary hugs him, surprising everyone. "You remember," she whispers. "Kindness isn't weakness." Carl's throat tightens. He wants to tell them how much they've changed him, how their decency tore through the lies he'd been fed since boyhood. But the words don't come. He simply nods and steps into the truck, his heart heavy. At Fort Robinson, the mood is restless. Hundreds of POWs wait for repatriation, their names shouted from clipboards by officers in khaki. Some men talk of staying, of applying for visas, finding work in America, but the law forbids it. The Geneva Convention demands their return. One evening, Carl walks to the camp fence and spots Corporal Haskins leaning against a jeep, smoking. "Heard you're heading out soon," Haskins says. "Guess you'll get to see the old country again." Carl exhales slowly. "It won't be the same country," he says. Haskins studies him, then flicks the cigarette into the dirt. "Maybe that's a good thing." They shake hands through the wire, and for a brief, quiet moment, there are no sides, just two men, weary and human, standing in the fading light. That night, Carl dreams of the farm, the smell of coffee, the sound of laughter, the endless Kansas fields. For the first time, he doesn't dream of war, he dreams of peace. September 5th, 1945. Aboard the SS Marine Falcon, mid-Atlantic. The ocean stretches endlessly, gray and calm beneath a low ceiling of clouds. On deck, German prisoners crowd the railings, the salt wind whipping at their faces. Karl Heinemann stands among them, his duffel at his feet, the faint taste of diesel in the air. For months he'd imagined this moment, the return to Europe. Yet now that it's here, his chest feels hollow. The Liberty ship plows eastward, its engines humming steadily. Below decks, the mess hall echoes with low voices and the creak of steel. Some men play cards, others argue politics in hushed tones. One insists Hitler is still alive, another laughs bitterly. Carl stays silent, sketching the horizon in his notebook. Each stroke of the pencil feels like trying to capture something slipping away. At dusk, he climbs topside again. The sea glows gold in the dying light, and somewhere in the distance, a pod of dolphins breaks the surface. He thinks of the Kansas plains, of the smell of wheat, of Walter Green's quiet laugh, of Mary's kind eyes, of the boy who gave him a piece of candy without fear. Those memories feel impossibly far away, yet more real than the home he's returning to. A voice behind him interrupts his thoughts. It's Dieter Vogel, another Luftwaffe sergeant, his face gaunt from years of war. "You think they'll hate us when we get back?" he asks. Carl shrugs. Maybe they should." Dieter studies him. "You sound like an American now." Carl smiles faintly. "Maybe I sound like a man who's tired of hating." Later that night, lightning splits the sky. The ship pitches and rolls, waves crashing against the hull. In the darkness, Carl grips his bunk and listens to the storm rage outside. He isn't afraid. He's endured worse. But something inside him aches with the weight of what he's leaving behind. He reaches for his journal and writes by the dim glow of a lantern. "I am returning to a land of rubble, but I no longer carry rubble in my heart." The storm fades by dawn. The sea calms. Somewhere beyond the horizon lies Bremen, a broken city. But inside Carl, something stronger has survived. The memory of mercy. October 12, 1945, Bremen, Germany. The city is unrecognizable. Streets once lined with shops are now nothing but ash and silence. Roofs gape open to the sky. The air carries the faint stench of smoke and dust, even months after the last bombs fell. Karl Heinemann walks through what used to be his neighborhood, his duffel bag slung over one shoulder. The church steeple is gone. The bakery his father owned, reduced to rubble. He stops in front of what's left of his family home, a jagged shell of brick and timber. The windows are empty, the door burned away. He kneels, brushing ash from a scorched step. There's nothing left to salvage, no one left to greet him. His mother's last letter had come in January, before the final bombardment. Since then, nothing. In the weeks that follow, Carl works alongside other veterans, clearing debris, salvaging wood, stacking bricks by hand. The once proud Reich is gone. In its place, hunger and humiliation. Yet amid the ruins, the people speak softly of survival, not vengeance. American soldiers patrol the streets, not as conquerors, but as watchful custodians. Their rations feed starving children. Their trucks bring medicine. One afternoon, Carl is assigned to help unload supplies at the docks. The crates bear American markings: flour, powdered milk, medical gauze. As he lifts one, he freezes. The label reads, "Property of Green Farm Cooperative, Kansas." For a moment, he just stares. The handwriting, familiar, looping. He imagines Walter Green signing the manifest, never knowing where the shipment would go. And yet here it is, across an ocean, in the hands of a man who once picked corn on that very farm. That night, sitting by the faint glow of a campfire amid the ruins, Carl takes out his notebook. The edges are frayed, the cover worn thin, but the words inside have survived the voyage. He flips to a blank page and writes in careful German, "They will rebuild this country not with strength, but with kindness. The same kindness they showed me." He pauses, listening to the quiet hum of distant generators, the faint cry of children somewhere beyond the ruins. For the first time since landing, he allows himself to believe that Germany, too, might one day learn what America taught him, that dignity is not given by victory, but by compassion. May 3rd, 1946, Bremen, Germany. Spring returns to the shattered city. Green shoots push through the cracks in the cobblestones, defying the wreckage. The air smells of wet earth and new beginnings. Karl Heinemann stands by the River Weser, watching the barges drift past, their hulls heavy with lumber and bricks for rebuilding. Around him, the city hums faintly again. Children playing near ruins, women hanging laundry between broken walls, men hammering wood frames for new roofs. He works now as a translator for the American military administration. Ironic, perhaps, for a man once trained to fight them. But the officers don't seem to mind. One major, a soft-spoken man from Iowa, recognizes Carl's name from the camp records. "You were one of the Kansas boys," he says with a grin. "Heard they treated you decent down there." Carl smiles faintly. "Better than we deserved." He lives modestly in a rebuilt tenement, surviving on ration coupons and odd jobs. In the evenings, he writes letters, sometimes to other former prisoners scattered across Europe. They speak of strange nostalgia for the fields, the laughter, the quiet respect of the Americans who guarded them. Some even return years later, this time as immigrants, drawn not by conquest, but by gratitude. One morning, Carl receives a small package postmarked from the United States. Inside, wrapped in brown paper, is a faded photograph. The Green family standing in front of their farmhouse, smiling, with the caption written in English, "You'll always have a home here." Beneath it lies a folded letter. "Carl, the farm misses its best hand. The war's over, thank the Lord. I hope you're safe. We think of you often. Walter, Mary, and little Sam. Not so little now. You once told me you wanted to see what freedom looked like. I reckon you already have. W. Green." Carl sits for a long time, the letter trembling in his hands. He feels the river breeze against his face, the same breeze that once swept across the Kansas wheat. He realizes then that the war had taken nearly everything from him, but not his faith in people. That the Americans had given back. He looks toward the west, where the sun sinks into the horizon, golden and endless, and whispers softly in English, "Thank you." The wind carries the word away, across an ocean, toward fields of wheat and barns full of laughter, toward the country that showed a broken soldier the meaning of humanity.